Yeah, that's way. Yeah, we have. Well, if you need help with your teach you whatever you need to know. I know you said you have a grandmother.
Oh, yeah,
That's good. That's great. I think she was going to put that.
Okay, BB Company for their 3-lot subdivision on Colbridge Road requested a 65-day extension and closing the public hearing. If you should have any questions, feel free to contact my office. This is Brooke Sawyer. Okay, I'm going to call the public hearing to order. Our first item will be 2017-1234 of WE85 Musa LLC, requesting permission to work in an upland review and inland wetland areas for loading areas, access drives, parking, material storage areas, entrance crossing area, access driveways, and parking for 962 trucks on chassis on property located at 85 and 90 Musa Pond Road, Wauregan, map 13, blocks 85, lots 3 and lot 10.
Good evening. Can we proceed?
Yes.
Thank you very much. I'm Valerie Farrell from Good Earth Advisors. I'm the permitting manager for the applicant WE85 Musa. Tonight we hope to go through a presentation that gives you details. I know we had appeared previously and gave you just a little snapshot of what's going on. Tonight we have detailed plans as well as prudent feasible alternative analysis, as well as our wetland scientists to go through some of the wetland values. Let me make some quick introductions. We have John Wagenblatt, who's the principal of LRC, to the left. To his right is Dan Imig, who is the principal engineer, and our wetland person sitting in the back, George Logan from REMA Ecological. Before we start on the technical stuff, we happen to have the president of Winstanley here tonight, Adam Winstanley, and he's just going to provide you a general overview of the project, what we're trying to accomplish, and then we'll get into the technical side of the presentation, if that's okay. All right, Adam?
Great. First and foremost, I'd like to thank everybody on the board here on the commission for reviewing our application and working in a diligent manner as we try and move quickly through the renovation of the building and our project. Is there any specific location you want me to stand? Do you want me to? Is this a good location, or do you want me to stand over here? I don't want to stand with So just quickly, for many of you know that our company, we purchased the building in January of this year, and we have undergone a very significant renovation of the property. When we first closed on the building, we found the building in pretty significant disrepair. The roof was compromised. We had a lot of active water leaks in the building, and there's a lot of asbestos in the building, and the silica towers that were there were all taking in a lot of water. The building was unsprinkled, the parking lot, and the site lighting was in poor condition. So my company, I've been active in Connecticut since 1994. I've done about 40 projects in Connecticut, mostly larger scale redevelopment projects. My closest project to Plainfield is I redeveloped the Norwich Town Mall, which was a failed mall a couple of years ago. Cut the mall in half and redid it, brought in some new anchor tenants and brought some new life back to that property. Most of the projects that I've been involved in the last 28 years have been in Connecticut. They've tended to be larger failed manufacturing plants, and I have focused on reinvesting in these types of properties and then trying to create new jobs in those facilities. This particular building was immediately of interest to me. I thought that it was, I hadn't spent much time in Plainfield in the past, but I thought the building was a building that could be rehabbed, and I thought that we could use our network of relationships. Our company has a pretty significant amount of relationships with major manufacturing companies and distribution companies. I felt that we could attract new users to this community if the building received a sufficient amount of investment. So our vision for the property was to reinvest capital back in the building. Some of you may know we purchased the building for $2.5 million, and we will spend on top of those dollars $16 million renovating the building. Just the roof alone is going to cost close to $6 million at the property. We spent over $1 million to take the compromised silica towers down. We'll probably spend close to $2 million putting new sprinklers in the building. We're modernizing the lighting with LED lighting. And ultimately, next spring, we will finish up the project by redoing all of the asphalt, landscaping, signage, and other things. As well as, doing life safety in the building, asbestos abatement, and other things. So it's a pretty significant investment, and in turn, once that building kind of meets what we feel is a market standard, we will be able to attract major companies. We've signed one lease already with Staples, who has a new division that is reoccupying the building. And our kind of signature deal is the Wauregan truck body deal. And Wauregan Truck Body is a very large privately held company that specializes in building box trucks. And as you could imagine right now with the growth of the internet, box trucks are in high demand. Wauregan is the preeminent manufacturer of those box trucks in the U.S. So a lot of the smaller delivery trucks that you would see in New York City and other denser urban areas, those tend to be Wauregan trucks. They have a very significant market share. So I see the building, once we kind of get through all the stuff we need to get through with Wauregan to get a project of this size off the ground, we're going to be looking to start construction on their new facility. We're negotiating a long-term lease, so they would be here for at least 10 years or longer, and they're going to generate 130 new manufacturing jobs at the facility. So I'm very, very proud to be working with this company, and I have a couple of prospect tenants that would take the remaining 146,000 square feet that we're talking with. One's a distribution user, one's manufacturing, so we'll kind of sort that out. But ultimately, our goal is to take a building that is tired and vacant and reinvest in it, bring it back to life, and create new jobs and new tax revenue for this community. And so that's our basic plan. So we've assembled what I think is a fantastic development team, and we've been working with Paul and the town staff, and obviously we're going to be transitioning with the new town manager to hopefully continue what has been a very productive relationship. And we're very happy to be here in this community. We hope that when this project's done, that the body of work is that people are proud of it, and obviously most importantly, we want to make sure that we do our part in being a good corporate citizen, generating tax revenue and jobs with this asset, and that certainly we seem to be having a good success with that so far. So that's the higher kind of level overview. You know, for what it's worth, I mean, some people know, others may not know. You know, based on the success of this project so far, you know, our company decided to buy the dog track site in town as well. So we plan on continuing to invest in this community and look for opportunities to continue to grow, and that could be on that side. We don't have any specific plans right now. It could be you know, a number of different types of companies that we're hoping to attract to that site. So it's not going to be retail, but it will probably be something else. So that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, I'll be around, obviously, all the time.
Okay, we are going to start the technical presentation. Do we have, is this being recorded? So, okay. Can we pass it up? Here.
Good evening. My name is John Wagenblad. I'm principal of the LRC Group, 160 West Street, Cromwell, Connecticut. As mentioned, the street addresses involved in this is 85 and 90 Moose Up Pond Road. 85 Moose Up Pond Road is the south parcel that I'll be referring to, and the north parcel is 90 Moose Up Pond Road. The quick overview, it's 85 Moose Up Pond Road. The south parcel is an 80.0 acre parcel with the main 529,000 square foot building, which was at one point in time the American Standard Manufacturing Facility. I'm sure most of you are familiar with. The 90 Moose Up Pond Road is a 22.8 acre parcel that's mostly open. And if you look at, I'm sure everybody can see this colored presentation. These lighter blues are the wetland areas that surround, and the wetlands do continue on the south parcel down to an exit point at the southeast corner of the property. The 90 Moose Up is generally a flat area with generally the grading kind of goes from the high point of Depot at All Hallows intersection and generally goes in a southerly direction toward Moose Up Pond Road. And as I mentioned, the green areas are wooded areas, and the lighter green is the field areas. And on the south parcel, it's the same area, the same denotion that these light green areas are existing maintained lawn areas, and then in the back we have a brush area that would be between the back parking lot and Route 12. The buildings cover approximately 14.8% of the south parcel. There's probably about 11% of the area is existing lawn, and about 13% is the remaining wooded areas and wetlands. The north parcel is bordered on the north and west by All Hallows and Depot Street, and on the south by Moose Up, and on the east by the railroad and some residential parcels. The southerly parcel is bounded by Moose Up Pond Road on the north, the railroad on the east, residential and Route 12 on the south, and some commercial properties, industrial property and commercial properties on the southeast, and Moose Up Pond Road on the northwest portion of the property. I'm going to move on to the proposed development. The north parcel, excuse me, I have to find one here. Oh, right here, sorry. When we originally submitted this part, this 5 weeks ago, we were proposing 962 chassis, which took up the whole north parcel. At this point in time, it's been reduced down to phasing it in phase 1 and phase 2. The phase 1 parcel would be creating 500 chassis and then an additional 149 in a phase 2 at another point in time. This will require creating some drainage basins throughout, which we'll get into further in the presentation, and having access from right across from the most westerly driveway. We're proposing on the chassis crossing Moosup Pond Road and going straight in, and this board. This is phase 1 of the 500, and I believe you do have that in your handout. 500 chassis. There will be a security fence surrounding all of the proposed 8-foot fence with landscaping around and creating some berming along All Hallows Road. This berming is not going to be a consistent berm because, as you are probably all pretty familiar with, All Hallows Road is fairly flat, and we have to allow water to drain off. So what we've created were little areas, little breaks, so water can drain off and not cause an issue on All Hallows Road. And also, because there is quite a bit of fill or topsoil on the site, we are proposing on having a topsoil pile, which will be more of also a screening, provide some more screening. On the south parcel, which is down here, we are proposing an employee parking lot in here for 136 cars for employees and visitors and handicap. A paved area for logistics and working for the vehicles. And then this lighter gray is the existing paving that's out there, that existing parking lot. What we're proposing is this darker gray is filling in, is expanding the parking areas, or the paved areas. There'll be a drive along the far east side where they'll come in and for access to the rear for deliveries, which will be, will be tractor trailer trucks coming in for deliveries. There will be a proposed security fence with gates that surround this back area. And keep in mind that all of this proposed development is the west, I'd call it the west third or so of the site on 85 Moosup Pond Road. They are proposing a few outbuildings. There's one right off of the, well, we'll take a step back. The existing westerly entrance, it's going to be expanded to allow for the delivery entrance and the vehicles to cross over into the chassis storage lot. They are proposing a small outbuilding here, which is going to be for customer pickup. That building will probably be there. I don't know if Wauregan has made a decision whether it's going to be a standalone building or a like a trailer, kind of like a job trailer. Then on the existing building, they're proposing and doing a little addition for the interior workings of the building, and then a covered building over in this area for inspecting chassis when they are delivered. The chassis will come in off of Moosup Pond Road and then come down and they go through a offloading process, and then they're inspected, and then after they're inspected, they'll go across the street and to a point when they're needed to be developed into a box truck. On the south side, we are proposing several detention basins in stormwater management areas scattered throughout. There's some in the very south, southerly part of the building, parking lot, the southwest corner, and going up around. We are proposing 1, 2, 3, 4, 7 of them, plus 3 on the north side. I'm going to let Mr. Logan talk about the enhancements that are going to be proposed on that in a minute. And really the other thing, the outside will be a fueling station for vehicles. Keep in mind that these vehicles, when they come here, they have very limited fuel. They basically are coming in on fumes, so they have just enough so when they get offloaded to go across to be parked here in the chassis lot. These units, when they are delivered, they will be delivered in I think like a U-Haul truck. They'll come in, they may deliver a dozen chassis, but they may not build them right away, but they'll be calling them one at a time, coming across the road, and then going through the process to be developed into the box trucks. At this time, I'd like to call up Mr. Logan, and we'll discuss what do you need?
It's okay, I'm good. Good evening. My name is George Logan. You heard that. I'm principal of the Green Ecological Services, Wauregan, Manchester, Connecticut. Just by way of background, I've been an environmental consultant, wetlands consultant since 1988. And I'm a registered soil scientist, I'm a professional wetland scientist, certified wildlife biologist, and also a certified ecologist. So my involvement with this project started on solar eclipse day, 8/21, of all things. And the first thing that we obviously did was to delineate all the wetlands. I'm going to put this right down here. It took a few days, and as you can see from the report that was submitted to the record, which is dated October 6, 2017, we spent a few days all the way up to 9/29/17. I kept coming back for a little more of something that needed to be done. Not all delineations, but also looking at baseline inventory, be able to describe what the wetlands are, what their functions and values are. And that's the matter of the second report that's been submitted into the record. But I'm going to give you a big picture overview first of what's out there as far as wetland resources. By the way, the soils report is here. Basically, it's sort of the verification of the wetlands delineations. Talks about the soils, what kind of soils are there. And there's some aerial photographs in the back. But the main part of the business that I'd like to talk to you about is in the second report that you've received. It's dated yesterday, November 20th. It has a lot of pictures and figures that attach with it, just to give you an idea. And there are 2 plates that were missing, so I'll put those in the record. I noticed that late this afternoon. So let's see if I can get the aerial photographs up. Those are always good to take a look. Put one on one side. And one on the other side. I'll start here. This is the northern parcel. There's 2 wetlands that have been delineated in it. You saw them better on that side, but one is here, I'm calling this wetland A, and I'm calling this wetland B. Wetland A is you probably have, most of you know, is an open field, and it's been a hay field for many, many years. It's cut probably a couple times a year, or some years more, some years less. So what that has done to this wetland is basically anything that grows fast, like the grasses, which are harvested, are doing very well in there. But other wetland plants are not doing so well. And so if you go through this wetland, one of the things that you quickly notice is that there's very few obvious wetland plants. There's some down here in this area which is a little wetter, but the rest of it is basically grasses, which is what has been hayed for many, many years. The soils, though, tell us another story. So these soils are definitely poorly drained soils. The SES calls them Walpole. I call them Leicester, but that's a different story for a little more technical situation. Basically what has happened is that the NRCS has called these soils as being derived from outwash deposits, basically meltwater outwash, glacial meltwater outwash. But as I looked at it, what I noticed that there is some outwash there, but it's thin. And if you hit the till within 6 feet, then you have to call them till soils. So that's kind of what's happened here. So I've called them a little bit something different from the SES, or the old SES. So wetland A, right here, it has a little bit of a protrusion going easterly, which I also had to delineate. Very transitional in nature. Again, this is the wetter part, and as you come this way, it becomes more and more transitional. If you look at the plants, and I'll talk about that in a moment, for instance, in this area, you can barely see any wetland plants. So it functions minimally. So in Connecticut, what we do is we use the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers functions and values. It's called a descriptive approach. And so we go through a whole bunch of rationales. I won't bore you with it, but basically we try to figure out which of the functions and values that a wetland gives us or has. So the functions are intrinsic to the wetland itself, wildlife habitat, whether we're there or not, it's there. But flood flow alteration is obviously a value. So that's something that we derive as humanity. So we try to find out what the principal ones are, which are the ones that are there and are functioning at a high level, versus the ones that are there but are not functioning at a high level. So there are functions and values that are present here, but not of them principle. So wildlife habitat, yes, but not a principle. We have flood flow alteration, yes, but not a principle. You have a restriction on the culverts of the water, obviously, ponds here during large storms. So that's what's going on with that wetland. There's a little more description as far as the plants in the report. Second wetland is kind of a little different situation. And by the way, one of the things that I've done in the report is I've given you, which I always like to do, archived aerial photographs from way back. Before I was born, before any of us were born, probably, unless some of you were from 1934. Those are the old aerial photographs we have at the State Library. And it tells you, if you look at the report, that this wetland was more extensive. There's all kinds of wetlands, actually, right through here in the building. And obviously in 1958, when this was built, some of these wetlands were filled, others were excavated, and there's been a lot of disturbance in the wetlands. There's really not much as far as wetlands on the entire property that have not been touched over the years. Wetland B is a little different story in the fact that this is probably an old kettle hole. We're going back from glacial times. It has organics in it. I agree with the SES, the NRCS on that. The organics are several feet. And you have a little pond. So if you look at a USGS map, you'll see a little blue thing which says it's a pond. If you look at the aerial photograph progression, 1934, 1951, 1965 going on, you will see that what the farmers had done at that time is any big rock that was found in here, or some other debris, maybe the large rocks that they had in the area, they lined them right around the pond. So all around this pond, there's big boulders and steep down into the wetland. Now, this is a shrub swamp. The dominant species in here is buttonbush. It's one of our only 3 true aquatic shrubs in Connecticut. Quite dense, and this is the signature you see here. There's something that comes around the corner. And And then there's some forested swamp that kind of rings it a little bit here. A typical species, you know, your red maples, your American elms. Find any. We found green frogs, we found spring peepers, and so on. So the fact that it's not connected to any large forested habitat also points to the fact that this is not a vernal pool habitat. Going down, so this is wetland A, wetland B, and now I'm calling this wetland C. And obviously I'm not going to talk about all the wetlands that are all over the other part of the property because they really are several hundred feet or more away from what's being proposed, but I'm only going to talk about the ones where we're within the upland review area or a little further than that. This is wetland C, and all of this is wetland C, and it drains out. You can see there's an old drainage ditch here. There's another drainage ditch here, and there's a big culvert, and this is where I stop what I'm calling wetland C, and that's going to be wetland D. Why? Because I can't remember a lot of things, so I need to split them up. This is, obviously from what you can see, even from the aerial photograph, is a mosaic of emergent or wet meadow types and scrub shrub types, and as you get back, it turns into more of a forested situation. The fact that this is scrubby and meadowy means that some years ago, someone went in there and kind of cut all the trees down. The shrubs and other vegetation have taken over and have not allowed the trees to proliferate yet. If we let it for another decade or so, probably the trees will come in. But obviously, actually, the fact that it's been maintained as a scrub shrub and meadow mosaic is a lot better from a lot of things, including wildlife. We have a lot of red maple swamps. We don't have a lot of this kind of wetland. So this is kind of an important wetland from that perspective. But however, as you will look at it, you will see that my wetland boundary is going into the lawn. And what that bespeaks is the fact that not only have we had mowing going on, but there's been some historic, decades ago, even before there were any wetland regulations, disturbance to the soils, and then the mowing happened and the lawn has been maintained, probably consistent. If you look at the aerial photographs, it hasn't really moved for many decades. So in many cases, you see that I have wetlands that are really just mowed lawn, but the soil types are there. So as it is in this state, when we look at soils, more than anything else, we have to call it a wetland. Again, this is a more extensive wetland. It has a nice scrub shrub emergent mosaic here, which has been maintained. And even though it's ditched in the back, it does have more functions and values. So there are some principal functions here. I'll mention one, wildlife habitat. Now, two things I need to note as we talk about oh, by the way, you're probably wondering about this. This is a little remnant wetland that's in an old berm that used to house a oil tank, which has been remediated. But we have a little wetland there, and that's wetland X. Don't ask me why I went from C to X, I just did. I think at this point I've given you the existing conditions, and I'll turn it over to this gentleman to talk about a little more about proposed conditions. At a little point later, I'll talk about the impacts to these two wetlands and the mitigation.
Because I was talking about those right now.
Okay, great.
What I will talk about now is what the actual impacts of the proposed development is upon the wetlands and the upland review area. There are two direct impacts to wetlands. The first is the crossing from the south lot to the north lot, which is right opposite, like I said, right opposite the existing west driveway going across. And as Mr. Logan mentioned, it's that lawn area or the field area that looks that's mowed and hayed. That wetland, and gentlemen on it is one of the 11 by 17s that I believe most of you have opened up to, and it shows the actual disturbance. This is the proposed edge of the road or driveway, access driveway, which we are proposing to be paved with curbing And the gray going outside of that is for grading, for bringing it up to a suitable grade to cross the wetlands. That's a total disturbance area of 4,160 square feet. The second is on the southerly 85 Moose Up. And what we're doing on the proposed drive is we are nicking one of these corners, which shows up here. Right in this area here, we're nicking the proposed, the existing wetlands, and that's the area that's mowed as well. So we're not going into the wetlands that Mr. Logan was describing with the brushy habitat. The other disturbance is in the upland review area. Total, because as you can imagine, there's I'll leave it here, I'm afraid I'm going to knock it over. This dark line going around is the upland review line. And with the wetland here, a wetland here, and then all the wetlands that Mr. Logan was describing, our total disturbance in the upland review area is 7.25 acres. Our old layout when we had was up to about 8.5 acres when we had 962 chassis in here, but now we're down to 725, or excuse me, 7.25 acres of upland disturbance. Now, we are proposing on 3 of the detention basins, stormwater management, is to enhance those for wildlife to mitigate. Do you want to talk about that, or?
Sure.
Okay.
Very quickly, so, right. As you can probably imagine, the groundwater is pretty close to the ground, even in upland areas, right? So even moderately well-drained soils, it means you're probably going to have groundwater within 24 to 36 inches sometime during the year. So we're concentrating also water in certain of these areas, and if you look, we're not digging much, but we're berming. We're in the top of the ground, especially some of these here, maybe a little less, a little more digging here. So we're basically creating a perfect habitat for wetlands. So we have the hydrology, and so what we've done in these areas, we've selected specialized seed mixes, which are commercially available. We use them all the time. And we're basically going to be scarifying the ground and applying those certain techniques of applying these seed mixes. And then there's a maintenance program so that we will keep the wetland habitats that are being created. In total, we're estimating, and this is a minimum number, that 17,560 square feet of emergent, high-quality emergent habitat will happen. And what we're trying to do is not to let it to be too wet, to encourage cattails, but to be more saturated or shallow. If you go too deep, then you're fighting cattails. I have nothing against cattails. I know a few species that love them. But we like to look at the diversity aspect. Another thing that we're doing also from a mitigation perspective for these less than 5,000 square feet of disturbance is to recognize that this meadow has been, I guess from the wildlife perspective and other functions, been compromised by the haying. Nothing against the farmer, that's what we do, and that's wonderful, and we need all the hay we can get. But since this now is going to be it's going to have development, what we've done is we've come up with a little plan that I've attached to the report, which tells you how we're going to enhance and maintain what I'm calling wetland A in perpetuity. I'm not going to get into the details, but basically we're using 2 seed mixes at a particular ratio and certain practices in order to introduce the whole host of species that are not there, might have been there at some point in the past, but also looking forward is how we're going to mow this, and basically we're doing it every other year. And so on odd years we do it in the spring, and even years we do it in the fall. And this is something that's practiced if you want to maintain a good meadow habitat. I did want to just, since we're talking about impacts, and someone's going to be talking about alternative analysis in a moment, and I think this is a good discussion. I wanted to read you from my report very, very quickly the list of dominant plants that are within this wetland area that we're disturbing. This is the 4,160 square feet, or something along those lines. And this is sort of from most common to least common. Queen's Anne's lace, grasses, couldn't tell you what they were because they were about this big. Milkweed, wild lettuce, landsleaf plantain, daisy fleabane, madder, toadflax, and sedge. Of all those, only the sedges are wetland plants. So that kind of tells you that we don't have much going on as far as wetland functions where we're crossing. Probably all of this is more a wetland because of soil type than anything else. And of course, the other little impact is in an area that's being maintained as long.
Give you the area of the enhancement.
Oh, the area of
Yeah, the
enhancement.
That's really what they want to know, George.
Oh, yeah, 76,125 square feet, so 1.74 acres. So all of that.
Good, good. So what I'd like to do is connect the dots a little bit, because I think even at the legal notice, you've noticed that there is a lot more parking to begin with. And we did some of this last week in planning and zoning, and I thought it would be helpful to just review that. Some of it's directly related to wetland avoidance, and some of it isn't. I will tell you that, as Adam spoke to earlier, Win Stanley does things the right way. They don't cut corners. And one of my jobs has been to meet with the staff, talk to people, understand what the implications are of the regulations and formulate a strategy. So in addition to looking to do a prudent and feasible alternative analysis, we were certainly concerned. We knew that we were abutting residences. And last week in planning and zoning, we talked about, full cutoff lighting, pulling things away from residences and doing what we can for buffering that, really exceeded the regulations. So we've done some of that, but the connection here I want to make, and really, let's use this. We did a board here for the alternatives analysis. Everyone can see this. Right down. When we first started the project, this is why I want to connect the dots a little bit. We were given this concept, and Morgan, Adam began negotiating the tenant agreements. And they told us that this is what they needed. This was before they committed to the site. This was really before the full team was aware, but we were in the middle of due diligence, and this is what we were given. Precisely, John was given. And so we started working through clearly what was an alternatives analysis to figure out, would this fit on the site? What were the wetlands, the impact's going to be, and how were we going to accommodate this type of development? One of the things that has been a challenge is just existing conditions. The configuration of the existing building, because obviously we can't change that. The building in relationship to all the wetland systems that you see here were in and of itself a constraint to us. So no matter which way we tried to do something, we kept hitting wetlands, or we were hitting upland rivers. But we still felt it was necessary to just continue that evolution of let's just cut back, let's see what we can do, tweak, tweak, tweak. We went through a series of alternatives, and no matter which way we cut this and designed it and laid it out and even changed the configuration of the access roads, we're always running into about 930 to 960. So we thought that was plausible, and we made the application then. We even looked at completely different access points. And at one point, we were trying to go through the middle and cross over to the north yard from the middle of the site. That, we turned out, after discussing with Morgan, is that we had to absolutely keep trucks. The trucks are unregistered. So we were not allowed to drive along the road with unregistered vehicles. So we went back to the drawing board, and as we basically pulled our team together and looked at what we had, we also realized that, given the configuration of the parking and the relationship to the residents, could we do more? Could we continue to refine this? Obviously, wetlands were driving the train. We try to avoid the wetlands as much as possible. But also, when you're trying to, if you can't avoid wetlands, the next thing is mitigate wetlands. And the mitigation of that wetland impact involves stormwater. And the stormwater handling on this site, which Dan will be talking about a little bit, became a significant challenge. So you put all these three things together: stormwater handling, the presence of the wetland system, and a recognition of the fact that we did have residences around. We made a decision to pull the parking and reduce it. We have reduced it by 40%. So originally we started with 1,000. We thought we could make it work at 967, and right now we're at 649. Now, interestingly, that reduction of parking didn't give us the bang for the buck that we were hoping to get for the upland review. Because our upland review, you heard John, we originally had 8.35 acres of impact of upland review. Reducing the parking by 40% only reduced the impacts to the upland review to 7.25. So we've saved an acre, which is good, but it wasn't what we were thinking. We were trying to just really do as much as we could to avoid that wetland, that upland review wetland area. So this has been a process. It was, a little bit of art and science. We made a concerted effort to pull the parking out of areas that were tucked in near residences so that we gave some more natural buffer. And that also relaxed our stormwater challenges. And that helped us handle the stormwater more naturally. And as George has alluded to, will give us an opportunity to enhance the existing wetlands. I think one of the things going through the regulations, we understand the crossing is certainly the direct impact, and it is unavoidable. There's nothing we can do other than not do the development to make this work without that crossing. It is reversible. It is a crossing. I mean, the good thing is we chose an area where we could get through somewhat at the narrowest. And if we had to at some point, let's say the site was reconfigured or repurposed, we always want to look to see, is our impacts irreversible? In this case, they are not, because you can always restore a crossing. When it's hard, when you're bisecting a large habitat and a large wetland, and you forever bisect that and really cannot reclaim it. In this case, it is reversible. The other impacts, as you heard George and John talk about, are upland review. And again, it's just a mere distance thing. You have regulations, you back into it, you see the wetlands all over the site, and besides all the wetlands, you have the building. So we had to make this work. We think tonight we have the best of everything. It gives the tenant what they demanded, even though it's no longer this. We've respected the site constraints. We try to avoid wetlands as much as possible. And we really think we can enhance those wetlands given the fact that they're really just of low value right now. So we're going to finish up. Have anything to add? Want to bring Dan up and we're done? Anything else? Dan.
Good. Good evening, everyone. I'm Dan Emig with LRC, a professional engineer here in Connecticut. I'll talk real briefly about the stormwater. We've come up with a design based upon the constraints that were mentioned earlier. The constraints, again, being pretty shallow groundwater table, and the site's pretty flat, so it's hard to move water. So in total, we have 16 different stormwater management facilities 8 of them are actually surface facilities, and 8 of them are actually underground facilities. All of the underground facilities are on the south parcel. So we originally had some underground facilities on the north parcel, but because of the reconfiguration of the parking, we were able to eliminate the underground detention facilities and put them all as surface facilities. So on the north parcel, the 3 new stormwater management areas are right here, adjacent to the existing wetland area. One right here, and then one right here. From a grading perspective, we're just adding a little bit of grade. We're picking up that center point so we can move the water to these different surface stormwater areas. On the south parcel, the remaining 5 surface detention ponds are there. There's 2 right here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And George already talked about how we're enhancing a portion of this one, which is number 1, and that's in the report, and number 6 to function and help the wetland functionality. The underground facilities we have 6 underground facilities at the front of the building. Obviously couldn't put surface detention ponds there. They need that space for their operation. So there's 4 under this employee parking lot, and there are 2 on the side. And then finally, the final 2 are on the very west side of the building and handle the runoff from there. So the engineering summary report, which has been submitted, summarizes all the technical information. Obviously, we're meeting all the town requirements and are mitigating and even reducing in a lot of cases storm event runoff up to the 100-year storm. So we get some pretty big volumes. I think that I've covered everything on the stormwater side. I'll turn it back to Sal and John. Control. Oh, you want to talk erosion control? Sure. Good.
Well, yeah, that's all, yeah.
Okay. Erosion and sediment control. The basins are a big part of the plan. Obviously, those will go in first in the sequence of construction. So as things are graded, they will run to the basins and protect the wetland areas. To supplement that, obviously, along the perimeter, we have the silt fence that shows up on the erosion sediment control plan. And any existing inlet, obviously, will have silt sack protection to make sure that we capture any sediment that's running off on the parking lots. That's really it from the erosion sediment control perspective. The basins play a
We
big role.
should mention, it's not paved. It's not a paved parking area in the north. So why don't you talk a little bit about the millings, the dust-free option that we've chosen?
So it's been, originally
Yes.
I think there was this discussion between gravel and millings, but the decision's now been made to go with the millings. You put down asphalt millings, and eventually, as they're driven on, it will compact naturally and provide a much nicer driving surface. But also, it will really reduce, gravel can be a little dusty. So the millings will eliminate the dust component and hopefully make for a better driving experience and less dust.
So in closing, I think we've demonstrated that we have avoided and mitigated any wetland impacts as a result of this project. We are not going to contribute to flooding, as we have adequately addressed stormwater, as you just heard Dan talk about. The project will not adversely affect adjacent properties, public space, or recreation in terms of the wetland function and flooding. We have addressed siltation and sedimentation consistent with state guidelines. We are not impacting groundwater or surface water bodies, as we've included containment provisions and adhere to the state's stormwater guidelines. And we are enhancing existing wetlands in a manner that will improve their functional value. So with that, our presentation is concluded, and we'll entertain questions.
Well, we've got all these people here, and I'm sure they want to hear a couple other things about maybe some of their protection, like the buffers and that stuff.
Actually, Ron, the buffers is something that the Planning and Zoning Commission will consider.
Oh, okay. All right.
Well, we certainly have buffers we've exceeded, just to address the planning and zoning requires 2 rows of evergreens at a certain height. aside from pulling it back from the residences as opposed to what we originally proposed, those plantings, those trees will be at least 2 feet higher than what the town is requiring. We also did a view shed analysis to look at these trees, 2 or 3 years in, make sure they do what they should be doing. And then, even though the regulations read that you have an either or, you could do vegetation or berm at the inspection of the Planning and Zoning Commission. In certain areas, we're actually doing both. So we're going to have a berm, and then the trees that are spec'd higher than the regs are actually going to be higher because they're going to be planted in that berm.
Okay, well, it's a public hearing. Does anybody like to speak? For or against this project?
Yeah, I'm Ron Thompson. I live on 62 Highways Road. And I actually went through the zoning portion of this meeting as well. I thought it was very well prepared. The information was prepared to everyone. The only question I had when I was looking through all the drawings, and I have a copy of those drawings as well, and I know you talked about the wetlands and the rest of it, and I think you did a commendable job of looking at it. I live on the street. I see where the water goes. I've seen how much of it there is. Last spring we had geese and ducks that were floating in the front yard of the former American Standard building. That corner on All Hallows Road, where the water was actually going across the street, and the house that's on the corner of that property, or just across the street from it, had pumps that were pouring water all over the place, trying to get the water off of their property and onto across the street. It's a mess at times. When I see the size of the parking for the trailers is what bothers me, because some of that actually absorbs some of the moisture when it's raining like crazy. And we have some storms that got 2 or 3 inches of water. And now, instead of having a sponge to absorb some of that, now you got an asphalt surface. Where all does the water go? Because basically the water's been sitting on the front yard of the former American Standard building, so all the geese were floating around in it, or in the big field. And now, without that sponge, where does all this water go? And I understand what you were saying about putting some drains around it, but it's just a significant amount of water that needs to be handled, and I just don't see where you've actually handled it completely.
In the building, and that the silica towers that were there were all taking in a lot of water. The building was unsprinkled, the parking lot, and
And Adam's going to love this, because it was difficult from a design perspective because of what you just said. There's pervious surface there now, and when we looked at the 100-year storm, for instance, we had to assume that not only was that pervious now impervious, but in our baseline assumptions, we assumed basically no infiltration into the detention basins or even the underground detention. So basically, the regulations say you have to mitigate pre to post, right? We're creating additional runoff post-development. We did that and beyond because we were concerned about the impacts larger storm events would have on Morgan's operation. So, again, it is the engineering calculations, I would say, are conservative in that regard, because even if we just met the regulations, there's the possibility that the lack of pervious area would impact the operation for larger storm events, and we've tried to design it so that wouldn't happen. There's no guarantee if you get a 100-year storm that exceeds the rainfall expected, but it should be a very significant rainfall event for it to really impact it. In most cases, as reflected in the report, it should be better post-development or actually retaining more water than even in the pre-development condition. So that would be my response to you. It's a valid concern. So.
My property joins American Standard all the way around my house, okay? Now you're talking about the water in the front of the place. But what about the water behind where my house is. Now, I have water, and you can go tomorrow morning, and you can see the water on my property. And you talk about wetland, between the state bringing all the water out of Route 12 on my property, besides American Stand's property with water, they have a brook that comes through. And when it's a heavy rain, the water goes over the brook onto the land behind my house. And sometimes I'm mowing my grass and I can't even mow it on my land because there's water most of the time. You talk about a 100-year water thing. Well, I don't have to wait 100 years. I see in my backyard, I can stand in my house and I can see all the American standards in the back. For one thing, the brook should be made wider and deeper so it doesn't overflow when you get heavy rain between the Route 12 and the American Standard. I never complained about it because I didn't know who the hell to complain. With the mill, it's been closed for how many years? I don't even know who the hell people were working there or anything. But now that this is going to happen and more water is going to go in the back, something has to be done because if I get more water on my property, there's going to be soup between Connecticut and American Standard. I want to be a good neighbor. I've always taken care of my property. But if I'm going to see a lot of water or more water behind my house, I'm not going to be a happy camper. So I think you should look at my property that borders the Standard property and see what they can do about keeping that water away from my property. This is right that I have all that water. That's all I got to say. Okay?
Dan, are you grading any stormwater to pass off onto adjacent neighbors?
No, we are not.
Is it going to the south? Is it going to his property?
I think we just answered that. We don't have extra drainage.
Oh, where's it?
We captured everything, and if
Okay.
you noticed, what we've done is we've exceeded, rather than meet the standards that were required at the state and local level, we've not only exceeded that, you notice what Dan said, we have underground galleys that the water's stored in, and that's what you really need to comply, and that's frankly why they're very expensive. That's why a lot of developers try to shed stuff off to the neighbors.
So there's less runoff,
Well,
in a sense, with those containment.
with this, yes,
Okay.
yes. So, and Dan, you want to talk a little bit more about how you handle that?
Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, right, so, again, the concept behind the stormwater retention, right, is that the water will run there and collect, right? And then there'll be a small outlet that will release the water at a rate that is actually reduced from what it was pre-development. And the rest of the water will stay in there. So that's how Val is saying that, we're actually reducing less water. And that's, on the engineering side, that's what the calculations show. It's because we're detaining so much and releasing it at such a small rate that by the time it actually goes off-site, it's less than what was there pre-development.
On May 9th, the year of 2000, Moosup Road Limited Partnership requested a zoning map amendment from RA 60 to industrial located at 90 Moosup Pond Road. There were many safety concerns discussed at this meeting. Here are some excerpts from the minutes of that meeting. Mark Sullivan, a certified soil scientist, reviewed the site and showed the aquifers overlay in primary recharge area. He said the regulations restrict industrial use in the aquifers. He said any contamination in this area would spread quickly due to the soil type. He showed a map of inland wetland soil types. Mr. Sullivan stated that the aquifer could be a financial benefit to the town in the future and needs protection. Stuart Denton, a board member, explained the nature of zoning, which is to protect people. He said the road system will be taxed and will not be beneficial to change the zone until the road is fixed. He stated that traffic is not addressed in the site plan, and he said he opposed it at this time. Gloria Reiser, another board member, stated that if the zone is approved, the board has the power to say no to a site plan if the road is not addressed. David Allard, who was the chairman, said to a certain extent. Stuart Denton said, you can't limit the number of trucks and the road is not wide enough. David Allard agreed that better infrastructure is needed. Stuart Denton motioned to deny the zone change and was seconded by Richard Jacques. All those were in favor and the motion was carried. It was unanimously denied. On October 10th, 2000, just a few short months later, Moosup Road Limited Partnership applied for the same exact zoning map amendment. It was met with a great deal of skepticism, for it was unanimously denied a few short months ago. Here are some excerpts from that meeting. Attorney Paul Kaplan represented the applicant and presented a drawing, noting that this application was completely different than the one presented in May of 2000. He showed an aerial photo and stated that a dedicated drive would alleviate the traffic concern. Attorney Kaplan said the traffic issues in buffer have been addressed, and this is an excellent location. Stuart Denton inquired if the dedicated access was for industrial use only. Paul Sweet stated that the plan of development lists it as an appropriate site and recommended road improvements. Attorney Stuart Norman represented the opposed residents and submitted petitions signed by 207 residents against the zone change. He stated that there had not been significant changes in the application. He referred to the March 14, 2000 staff report, which stated that a zoning map amendment subject to conditions is illegal. He said exit 87 was a good site for industrial use, and the key is location. He said you couldn't make a zone change based on this. He said the roads haven't changed and are still narrow and overburdened. Attorney Norman stated that there are no easements or wetland approval. He read the preamble of the town of Plainfield zoning regulations. He stated that the zone change would decrease property values. He said a worst possible road could not be found. He mentioned that the site was an aquifer protective district, a large portion in a primary recharge area, and a portion is secondary recharge area. He said many soils are poorly drained and submitted a wetlands map and aquifer map. In closing, Stuart Denton said a zone change would open up to any industrial use. He said traffic should have been addressed already, and he felt the state would not be responsive. He said the change would make a bad situation worse. Richard Jacques motioned to approve. Beatrice Oris. Stuart Denton opposed. The motion was carried 4-1. Thank you. If I could rebut that. We all in attendance, I brought a lot of this information to Mrs. Socia. I tried to. He kept insisting that they cannot do this. They cannot make that zone change. And he explained to me, when you make a zone change, you have to do it as the land lies. And during that meeting, where the public was not able to speak, the zone, and I was a witness to this, the board was debating on whether they should have a public hearing. And a lot of the members wanted to have a public hearing. Mr. Socia interjected and basically talked them out of having it and just said, I don't think we should have a public hearing. So that's why I appreciate the latitude and the leeway of talking about, but this is the only voice that we could actually do this. Thank you.
Once again, nothing that he said has anything to do with this commission. I do have, oh, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Just to say, Mr. Chair, just the record should state that we're not requesting zone change. I believe the speaker was addressing something that occurred back
That's what I'm looking at. And I have 3 kids, and I want to know how they're going to be okay with all this going on.
In terms of the storage.
Well, security, for one thing. You know, we've already had break-ins up and down our road and things. So I want to know, you're going to put a fence around?
By regulation, absolutely.
Okay.
Yes.
Is there security cameras? Like, what are we doing to secure this area so people aren't in and out all over it? Or doing anything to that area?
Wauregan's securing it. To be honest with you, we're not at liberty to discuss what they have. But I mean, it's not really in the purview of wetlands, but I'd like to answer your question. You know, security is as important to them as it is to everyone. They have millions of dollars. Staples as well. Adam has discussed security with them. And there's going to be site lighting. Lighting is helpful. It will be full cutoff. In addition, we're specifying some additional flanges on the residential side, so there's no, you know, light pollution, but where the light needs to be will be there. So between the lighting and the fencing, the security and the other things that Morgan has is frankly proprietary, and they are really, you know, not discussing those details, but they know that they need a secure site. And the discussion we've had on our team meetings every Wednesday talks about the security of the site. So I think it's everyone's concern, and I think, you know, if they saw vandalism or something like that, it would be addressed immediately.
How this increases the value is that, very simply, right now,
This is a vacant structure that I bought for $2.5 million with the roof caving in. Graffiti all over the building. You have vandalism, broken glass all over the site. It's desolate and nasty. After we're done spending money on this facility, creating a whole new facility that's modernized with LED lighting and everything completely done, and we're creating a lot of jobs. So Wauregan alone is going to start with 130 jobs. That will grow to over 200 jobs. When you create new taxes and new jobs, that creates vibrancy in this community. People will then be looking for houses, and when there's more people moving here into this community, it raises everybody's property values. It helps the school systems. It helps everybody. When you have vacant properties in your community and you're not generating jobs, you're in decline. So these companies right now, Wauregan alone, they did a multi-state search between Rhode Island, Massachusetts, and Connecticut, and I have been battling other states for many, many months to get them to land here. So I would argue the opposite of what you're saying. I understand nobody wants to see change. I get that.
But you don't live there.
You know what? It doesn't matter.
I have a beautiful, beautiful field, but you have to understand, which is at my house.
I understand that people don't. I understand that people don't want to change. That's why we've taken the parking lot from 1,000 spaces to 600. We've cut it in half, basically. But I would argue at the end of the day, if this sat here and fell into the ground, you're worse off than when we're done with this project. This project, at the end of the day, will create vibrancy. It will change. The building's going to look different. The area's going to look different. But I would argue that it's going to be better.
Because we're going from a single tenant to a triple tenant building. This site has been zoned industrial for over a decade, as I understand it. You have lived there for how long? 12 years.
Well, my family's been there for 45. My house has been there for 45 years.
So we're simply proposing a use consistent with the regulations. And again, we are way off the legal confines of wetlands right now, but just to address, we're not asking for zone change. The land adjacent to your property has been zoned industrial for quite some time. And we are exercising the right under the regulations that allow us to propose an industrial use. We've done everything we can
all this water gonna go that you're diverting?
I think we've answered that question.
No, you just
We
move it
can't-
from point A to point B.
No. We are not allowed to take the water and move it off-site.
So you're gonna say it's gonna evaporate and go into the ground?
Nope.
Where's it going?
We explained that there is open sedimentation basins that will come, retain, and allow groundwater infiltration.
So you're
And then-
talking-
Excuse me.
Okay, go ahead.
And then underneath the parking areas will be underground galleys, and they will also capture and hold the stormwater. That's what we will do, so it does not go off-site.
So
We are
you-
required by law.
You're putting in a big driveway that captures water.
Basically a septic system.
Yeah, right.
Yeah,
Basically,
fancy,
right?
very expensive
But-
system, but,
Right, yeah.
so you've answered your own question. Yes, we have.
But it don't go nowhere.
No, they're designed to infiltrate the groundwater. I mean, they're designed to recharge the groundwater from internal instead of going out onto the land first.
It's gonna
It's
go
just a
deeper
mean-
into the ground.
Yeah, there's a means of infiltration, so
That's,
it's
yeah,
just.
okay, right.
Yeah.
Because I was gonna say, if there's any runoff, it's gotta run somewhere.
Well, you're right, and that's exactly why the runoff, that word in the state regs and your planning zoning regulations reflect that. You cannot increase, there's a zero runoff provision, and by the way, not every state has this, but Connecticut has a zero runoff provision. So we cannot have more runoff from the site. We have to keep our runoff on our site.
Water, I'm serious as a grave. I live across from this waterway, and salamanders, yes. Well, I assume so, because they're at my house, and if they're at my house, they gotta be there. But you don't see them every day, you don't see them every month. Frogs, yeah, there's all kinds of frogs, different types. Turtles too, because they come out, and they come over here, and they lay eggs. Not just snapping turtles, but all kinds of, 2, 3 types, yeah, all kinds of turtles, snapping turtles too. But I don't believe it's water all the time. I think in extreme drought, you'd be probably not find a drop of water, but that's what the application is about for this side of the street, correct? Good. Thank you. But that was interesting. I could listen to you probably all night.
My question is, yes, I understand there's cisterns, but these are gonna be companies that are leasing out property. Where is the runoff of the traffic that's going to be excess of what's currently there going to go? Because that's not all gonna happen in your parking lots with your cisterns going under and then going back out again. I wanna know what we've done to the roads to make them capable to handle all this excessive traffic. Because I can tell you from where I live, it can't. I'm not done talking, please wait. Thank you. And if you're coming down the other side, there's the steep hill over to the tracks. Otherwise, you are going around Green Hollow. This is not a prime area for that many 18-wheelers, trucks, or any of that to be coming in and out. I want to know if the town has actually taken that into consideration, and is that something that will be addressed with a heavy traffic load? I have 2 kids and people that don't pay attention to the traffic that's there now. And all those excess trucks and all of the hazmat issues that happen in any industrial site will affect the water and the wildlife and the plants that are there.
Yeah, Mike, you're getting a little off of what we're really here for.
Is it not for
Did you have a
wetlands?
wetlands question?
Is the environment not part of the wetlands? That is what I'm talking about.
Traffic and wetlands are 2 mutually exclusive things.
No, they're not. The traffic that will be increased.
Let me just answer a question, so, as part of planning zoning, which this is not,
right,
but your question is, requires a state traffic certificate that's done in conjunction with the planning zoning commission and the planning zoning staff. So when you go into a development development like this, we have a fleet of traffic engineers. They've done traffic counts, they've looked at vertical, horizontal alignments, they've looked at site distances. All of this is required by the state. It's called OSTA, Office of